Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the main stage here at AMA Expo, sponsored by Hobby King. We're ready for our first presentation here at 2 o'clock. I'd like to introduce you guys to our first speaker. His name is Eric Boehm. He's the aviation curator at the Intrepid Sea and Air and Space Museum in New York City. He was a member of the curatorial team that recently produced the exhibit On the Line, the Intrepid in the Vietnam War, and was the curator of the Hubble at 25, an exhibition celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Hubble Space Telescope. Since 2005, Eric has been directing the refurbishment and preservation of the Intrepid's 26 aircraft and the prototype Space Shuttle Orbiter Enterprise, a program that he created from the ground up. Eric is also a 20-year veteran of the United States Air Force with experience in aircraft maintenance, public relations, and exhibition development. He credits his lifelong passion for model aviation for his successful career in the preservation of historical aircraft and the stories of the people that flew them. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Eric Boehm.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, who wrote that? That's pretty cool. Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening to me. Last year, Erin Dobbs from AMA said, hey, will you be one of our speakers next year? And I said, yeah, sure. And hoping that she would forget about it or that I would at least find a way to squirm out of it. But obviously that didn't work, so here I am. And so what I was thinking about, I wonder what to talk about. It's how model aviation has been a part of my life, my whole life, and how it influenced me in that trajectory of my life and into my career. And I hope I can shed a little light on what I do and what we do out at the Intrepid, and maybe we can, if any scale modelers out there or any just aviation enthusiasts at all, which almost all of us are, how we can help you with that. And maybe you come visit me sometime. Yeah, so I'm the epitome of the chip off the old block. That's my dad. In 1946, when he was 17 years old, he ran away and joined the Navy and became an aviation gunner on Avengers. He was a ball turret gunner on Avengers. He was on the USS Shangri-La. They got to the war a little late, but he was already a modeler as a kid. He grew up right over here in Union, New Jersey. He claimed to have the very first AJ Fireball of the kids in the neighborhood. So he was always that model airplane guy. And my favorite story from Dad was how he, when he got assigned to the Shangri-La and they were on their way out to the war, it was the very late part of 1944. They're going through the Panama Canal, and the Shangri-La was an Essex-class carrier, lots of airplanes, and the airplanes were stowed below deck so that the Japanese spies in the hills around Panama could not see what airplanes you were bringing to the war zone. But him and another kid, they had a control line model on board with them, and they asked the air group commander if they could fly on the flight deck. So the Japanese spies, the only thing they got to see while the Shangri-La was transiting the Panama Canal was two kids playing with a control line airplane. So lost my dad in 2005, but he was always, I blame the balsa wood and dope in my DNA directly from him. So yeah, that's me, 1965, 1966, Dad's last control line model and his first RC model. And so even as a kid, it was always part of my life. So I've been a lifelong modeler, and I change my interest constantly. You can see this is just a very small sampling of some of the stuff from just the last couple of years, and including a boat down there in the bottom corner there. But it seems like every 5 to 6 years I change my interest from free flight to RC, back to control line, back to free flight. And I actually wrote down the numbers. I actually thought about it. I don't know if anybody's ever kept a log of every model you've ever built, but I did. And so to date, I have 71 free flight models, 37 control line models, and 26 radio control models that I've built and crashed. There's only a couple surviving in the hangar right now. So I just wanted to really introduce myself and let you know who I am before I start talking about the Intrepid. I am not a competitor. I entered one contest in my life. It was a free flight old-timer rubber competition out at Muncie, Indiana. My very first time at Muncie. I made the issue of Flying Models in 2002. Don Ross, who we lost a couple of years ago, but Don put me in the Crossfiles article. That's me holding my Miss World's Fair, and the reason he put me in the article is because 10 seconds after that first picture was taken, the second picture, the rubber motor exploded and destroyed the airplane. So the only contest I ever entered, I did not even fly in. So So just a little more about myself. I ended up in the Air Force like Matt said. I always wanted to be a pilot. I have very bad eyes. I also am afraid of heights, and I also get airsick. So a lot of speakers will come up here and they'll talk about model aviation and how they fly real airplanes and race in Red Bull racing things and do aerobatic flying. And though I wanted to be that guy, I just did not possess that. And so my career options were kind of limited when I was young. So I enlisted in the Air Force and became an aircraft sheet metal mechanic, which was just the most fun, artistic thing I thought I could ever do. It was just a whole lot of fun. And that was kind of the basis of my life. And I brought modeling with me everywhere I went in my Air Force career too. So I want to fast forward after 20 years in the Air Force and another 7 years in working with exhibit displays for museums. I ended up at the Intrepid Museum in New York City out of sheer luck. And what a wonderful place it is. There's a lot of images right there. I'll take questions at the end. There's something kind of weird there. If anybody noticed the Galileo shuttlecraft, you want to know that story, you'll have to ask me later. So just a little preview about the Intrepid itself. I hope you come visit us in New York City. It's just over the river. In fact, you could jump on a bus right outside the building here and be over there in about 10 minutes, another 10-minute walk across town to get to the Intrepid. We see 1.2 million people a year, which is pretty good for us. You know, they're seeing 5 million people at the Museum of Modern Art, but we're not in Midtown. We're a little harder to get to, and it's 1.2 is a pretty good number for us. We're trying to get more. We do special programs for children, 180,000 children in New York City. These are kids that don't get great science programs, don't get aviation programs for sure. These are kids in needy neighborhoods, and we service them directly through grants from the Department of Education in New York. We also do some really great access programming. We do special programs for the deaf and hard of hearing. We do special programs for the blind. But one of my favorite programs is we bring older veterans out that are suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, and we do special tours. And we do them after hours or before hours when there's not a big crowd. And it's just wonderful to see the guys come in, World War II vets in their 90s, and their family will tell us, you know, he hasn't spoken in 2 weeks, or he hasn't remembered the war in 6 months or 2 years. And then he sits through one of our programs and you see the light come on, and just for a little while they're young again, and it's so much fun. I have 27 airplanes in my collection, and I'll talk about a little bit more about the airplanes as we move on. So what I'm really here to talk about, you saw my model aviation background and how I could never become a pilot. I actually tried one more time to fly. When I joined the Air Force in 1977, they were recruiting guys to be the boom operators in tankers, which is an enlisted position. And that was I was planning to go to college, which I eventually did. But early in my career, I thought that would be pretty cool. I get to fly, and I get to fly the boom in a refueler. And the KC-10 was just coming online at the time. And then I go and add to all my other foibles and things that are wrong with me, add color vision. And I could not pass the flight physical. That's how I ended up an aircraft sheet metal guy. But I really want to talk about the aircraft collection that we have. Collection rationale, why we collect what we collect, why we have what we have, and why we're trying to get rid of some of the stuff we have. The outdoor aircraft, what are our challenges of the outdoor aircraft. Some of the research we do, which kind of helps modelers. I've had people walk up to me on the deck and pull out their wallet and show me their AMA membership card, saying, I'm a member of the AMA, and I'm working on a scale model of that, and I was wondering if I could take a close-up picture of the landing gear, and I'm like whipping out my wallet, here, I am an AMA member, and yes, and but I want to tell you, I get it a lot of phone calls. It's only 27 airplanes in the collection, so it's not a vast collection, you know, nothing like the Smithsonian or Wright-Patt. But if you're doing a F9F Cougar and you want details of the Cougar, please call me. I would love to have you come out, and I'll let you own the place. We'll get behind the ropes. I'll even take you to lunch if you're buying. I love meeting modelers out on the deck. I started there 14 years ago as head of the restoration department, which was a department of one. Since then, when they found out I had a degree in history, I wanted to be an engineer, couldn't do the math, so I majored in history. Real historians don't like when I say that, but now that I'm the curator, I had to hire people to work in the hangar, and I now have a staff of 3. So 14 years ago, I kind of got the program up and running, and now I have a full staff of 3 to do the restoration work. I'm also going to talk about interpretation, how we interpret the airplane. Some of these things are not wearing the markings they wore in service for one reason or another. And the educational use, I'll touch on that. So, give me that. All right, so the airplanes are outdoors, and it's very challenging. And in the mornings when I get to work before the crowds arrive, and you listen very quietly, and you're above the street level, so you don't hear the noise of the traffic, you can actually hear the airplanes rotting away. It's New York City. It's the salt water. The Hudson River is salt water all the way up to the Tappan Zee Bridge, really. It's the wind, the birds. The birds are public enemy number 1. It's just the environment, the snow, the rain, the sun. The sun beats down on these things, and it's destroying the airplane. So it's a constant battle and a constant rotation of repainting and fighting corrosion and changing tires and putting new canopies on. And even the canopies I can't afford anymore. But and you can see these pictures here. There's an airplane covered in snow. Sometimes it's just a challenge that's overwhelming. When I got there was nothing. I didn't even have a toolbox. Created it from nothing in 2005, and they gave me a tent. That's what you see up there on the left. I had that tent on a 5-year plan. It lasted 10 and a half years. It took me 10 and a half years to raise the money for that temporary building you see on the right. And I say temporary, it's on the flight deck. It is considered temporary, but it does hold out the weather, and it's heated. So we now work 12 months a year out there. And we just opened that a couple of years ago in 2016. It's been wonderful. I want to talk about collection rationale because some people call and say, hey, do you got a P-51 Mustang? Nope. We're an aircraft carrier. Our rationale for our collection is to try, very number 1 priority is to get the airplanes that served on Intrepid. Now, Intrepid had a wonderful history, served in World War II, hit 5 times by kamikazes, hit once by a Japanese torpedo, kept coming back for more. The ship goes into the 1950s. She goes into renovation. She misses the Korean War, but reemerges in the about 1955, serving in the Cold War. The ship then in the 1960s. 1957, she got her angled flight deck. 1960s, the space program happened. Scott Carpenter, the second Mercury mission to orbit right after John Glenn. We recovered Scott Carpenter. I got to meet him before he passed away. Marvelous guy. And then the very first Gemini mission with Gus Grissom and John Young. The Intrepid recovered that. And then after that, it was the Vietnam War. 3 trips to the Vietnam War for Intrepid during Operation Rolling Thunder. So here we have a ship from 1943 to 1973 with all that happening. So there's a lot of history to interpret and guide the collection rationale. One of the things we have is the Space Shuttle Enterprise, which was like, I was very excited to get it, and at the same time I went, no, no, it's not in our collection rationale. But NASA made a pretty compelling argument for us. When they were retiring the space shuttles, one went to Udvar-Hazy, they had Enterprise, they got Discovery. One stayed in Florida, one went out to LA, but they wanted to spread the vehicles out so as many people in the world can see these things. And we're New York City. In fact, at Intrepid, 60% of our visitors aren't from the United States. So that international visitor gets the exposure to NASA and the space shuttle. So I'm kind of glad we have it. But there's airplanes on board that just don't belong there. In fact, just about a month ago, there was a French étendard on the deck when I got there 14 years ago. And I was always wondering why that was there. It was a gift from the French government because they didn't know what to do with it. I was able to transfer that out to the Pima Air Museum, and they paid for the move, so that was a good move. But you have to be, I'm taking care of these airplanes. I mentioned they're rotting away right before your eyes. So we have to have the capacity to care for them and to have an airplane that doesn't fit into the collection rationale that I can't interpret into the Intrepid story. It's just difficult to have. I have a couple of airplanes that are hard. Notice in the center there, that little brown and tan jet, that's a Kafir. That's an Israeli Kafir. I think it may be the only one on display in the United States. There are a couple still flying in the United States because there's a company it's a civilian company based out of Virginia. They fly a couple of these things and are contracted by the Navy to offer dissimilar aircraft training. Top Gun. but it's a civilian company that flies them. But that was a gift from the Israeli government. But we're New York City. We have a very large Jewish population. And if you're Jewish, you know the holiday, for some reason, Purim, the Jewish holiday of Purim, the whole ship, we get about 6,000 Orthodox Jewish people come out to visit our ship. And they learn all about the history and stuff, but they seem to gather around that airplane because it's an Israeli airplane. It's just, we find that very interesting. And so that airplane will remain, of course. Moving along. So research. I love doing the research, and I could tell 1,000 stories. I'll tell you about this story here. This is pretty cool. When I arrived, that A4 Skyhawk in this photograph is how it appeared. Notice the number 300, a blue lightning bolt, and back on the tail it said VA-66, Attack Squadron 66. The airplane was in pretty good shape, and it was very low on my priority list. It was inside. I have 4 aircraft of the 27 are indoors. It was indoors. It was in good shape. Didn't need to do anything with it. But the historian in me, eventually, I researched everything I had to see what was in my collection. And that airplane never served in Attack Squadron 66, so I was bewildered to why it was painted that way. So, and if you guys are familiar, most aviation enthusiasts are, Navy airplanes have what's called the bureau number. It's a 6-digit number for an airplane of this era. The last 4 digits, 2833, right there on that photograph. That was the bureau number of this airplane, and that's kind of like the VIN number in your car. You buy a used car, you do a Carfax, they want that VIN number, right? Any other markings on the airplane are like a license plate. You change owners, you change license plates. So I just couldn't figure out what was going on because 2833 was actually in Attack Squadron 95. It was built in 1959. It's a B model. It served in the Marine Corps for 3 years and then went to storage in Arizona and sat in storage until 1966 when the Vietnam War started getting hot. Lyndon Johnson initiated the Operation Rolling Thunder, if you know your Vietnam history, and we were sending a lot of attack aircraft on carriers into the war zone in Vietnam. And they dragged this thing out of, and many others, dragged them out of storage and formed VA-95. Then the big bell went off, and I'm like, wait a minute, VA-95 was on board the Intrepid 1966. So with more research, this airplane was actually on Intrepid in 1966. In fact, I have 10 airplanes. Of the 27 airplanes in the collection, 10 are of types that served on Intrepid. But this is the only airplane in the entire collection that really served on Intrepid, the actual airplane. So I call it my Mona Lisa. Yeah, you go to the Louvre, you visit the Mona Lisa, come to the Intrepid, come see the Skyhawk, because this airplane actually served on the ship. And so I had to repaint it. I repainted it into VA-95 markings, but the historian in me, I'm more about the airplanes. I'm an airplane guy. The airplanes are important, but what about the guys that flew it? So if there's any Navy veterans out there, you might know what a cruise book is. When the Navy crew goes out on a mission, maybe Intrepid was an anti-submarine carrier in the 1960s before going to Vietnam, and did a lot of stuff in the North Sea and the Mediterranean, when she went on these long cruises for 3, 6, 9 months. The crew would make a cruise book. These cruise books look like your high school yearbook or your college yearbook, and you flip through them, and there's each squadron and each division within the ship and all these pretty faces. And so I went to the cruise book for 1966, knowing that I had an airplane from VA-66 or VA-95. Went to their page, and there's all these pretty names and faces. And so I picked the most unique name of all the pilots, and I Googled him. His name was Roland Shea. So if you're going to Google somebody, don't Google John Smith. Sorry for any John Smiths out there, but there's a lot of you. But how many Roland Shays can there possibly be in the world? And I found one who was the right age. I Googled him. I found his address and his phone number. You're out there. You're out there, people. And so I called him. And so he wouldn't think I was a telemarketer or anything. I talk really fast. And are you the Roland Shay that was on Intrepid VA-95, 1966, flew A4 Skyhawks? He's like, yeah, who the hell is this? And I'm like, well, I'm the curator up at the Intrepid, and I think I have one of your airplanes here. And he actually put the phone down and got his logbook. It took him a while. I was going to hang up on him, but he got his logbook, and he goes, what was that bureau number again? He had this airplane in his logbook 15 times. It was just amazing. He was crying. He was crying. I thought that airplane was beer cans. And it was just, And this has happened with a few of the airplanes. I'm not going to tell you every story because we'll be here all day. But to actually know a guy, and then he introduced me to as many pilots he was still from the squadron that he was still in contact with. And we've done oral histories with these guys. We've flown them to New York. We've actually traveled. We got a grant for our oral history program, and we've actually went on the road to interview these. Some of these guys are they're not traveling maybe because of age or disability, and so we go to their homes and get their oral histories, and that's just been a lot of fun. One more thing on research. I was contacted about 6 years ago by the Airfix model company in England. You know, the Airfix plastic model kit guys? They're like, hey, you got a B model A4. We're redoing our 1/72nd scale kit of the A4 for the anniversary of the Falklands War. And we want to come and measure your airplane because it's the same model that the Argentinians used against us. I said, well, that's pretty cool, but you know, why don't you do it in my markings? And they were like, nah. But the guy flew from England, and I let him crawl all over the airplane. He was on it for like 6 hours, measuring every little thing. And I'll tell you the truth, Airfix kits aren't that detailed. But he spent a lot of time measuring everything, and they reproduced the kit. But with all my negotiations with them, they then decided that the Intrepid markings would be a secondary decal within the kit. And I still didn't accept that. I wasn't happy about that. And eventually, I persuaded them to make the Intrepid decals the primary on the kit box art, and that's what that is down in the bottom left. That is actually the artwork that's on the kit box for that kit, so it's that very airplane. And just one more little side story about this. I'm going to watch my time. That photograph in the upper left of the airplanes in flight, that is actually our airplane in flight, 1966, bombs under the wings, extra fuel tanks, with other airplanes in formation on the way to Hanoi. And when Raleigh introduced me to all these other guys, I called them all one at a time. Some of them he called first, so they knew I was coming. But I found a guy, and I won't use his name. He was right here in New Jersey, and he was the closest one. And I was really excited because I have a VA-95 guy right here in New Jersey. And but he was like, you know, Vietnam was a long time ago, and I don't like talking about it, and really, you know, I'm not interested in sharing my story or anything. And I totally respect that. We deal a lot in the charity the charity that's under the Intrepid umbrella, the Fallen Heroes Fund. We see a lot of PTSD. In fact, the Intrepid Foundation has also built 2 brain injury centers and a burn center through our charities for the U.S. military with money that we have raised through the museum. But I respected his wishes, and I just kind of let it go. About a year later, the information desk at the museum said, hey, there was a guy here, and he dropped off a photo. I'm like, really? And I went, and it was that photo. So this gentleman, actually, after a year after I contacted him, summoned up enough courage to come visit the ship for the first time since he served on it in 1966. Didn't tell me he was coming. I never met him. But he left that photograph. So he is sitting in an airplane, the lead in the formation, with a little Instamatic camera, and he faces to the right, and he snaps that photograph, and it's our airplane. And the only thing and I had very little photographic evidence of the airplane on board other than some notations and logs and things. And what I found out, thanks to him, was that I didn't get the lizard right when we painted it, but I didn't have this photograph. So someday I'll repaint this airplane, and I'll get these bomb markings put on. I'll get the lizard painted right. There's a little piece of black right here to cover the schmutz that comes out of the muzzle of the gun that's there. And the 512 is also not exactly in the right place. So we'll make it correct. But I wish I had that photo before we repainted it. But that's the kind of stuff we do. And I'm happy to work with anybody that has any kind of questions. You're making a scale model of an AD Skyraider of some model or another, give me a call. I'll go through our archive. I do this on my lunch hour because it's fun to do, but I'll go through my archives and try to find you the photographic evidence you're looking for of anything. So more research. One real quick story. This is our F-11F Tiger. If you know anything about F-11Fs, The Navy bought a whole bunch of them. They only used them in fleet service for about 3 years because airplanes of the 1950s were kind of obsolete right as they were rolling off the assembly lines. A lot of them went to storage, never saw any kind of fleet service. But these guys, the Blue Angels, used the F-11F for over 12 years. Even when the airplane wasn't in active service, the Blue Angels were still using it because they had a boneyard full of them to choose from. And so when I arrived, the airplane was in these standard Navy markings for VF-33. Once again, the bureau number search on this showed me nothing. The history of this airplane, I believe it was built in '58, when it went immediately from factory to storage. It was dragged out in 1961 and put back in storage in 1964 with about 1,500 hours of flight time on it. Not a lot for an airplane from that era. It just so was, I'm like, what is it? What is it? I was talking to somebody, another professional in the museum world. He goes, maybe you got a Blue Angel. You know, they used those things for 12 years. I'm like, wow. So I got under the belly of this airplane with my pocket knife and I scraped away a little of the paint. And what did I find? Blue Angel blue and that gold yellow arrow painted on the belly. I had a Blue Angel. I had Blue Angel. And I called the Blue Angel Reunion Association. And they helped me track down the bureau number. He goes, you got number 5. Number 5 from 1961, 62, and 63 show season. Cool. First thing I got to do is repaint that airplane as Blue Angel number 5. And while I had him on the phone, I said, who flew Blue Angel number 5? He goes, oh, that would be Lieutenant Lou Chatham. And I said, is Lou still with us? He goes, yeah, he absolutely is. He's very active in the Reunion Association. He lives out in Tucson, Arizona. And he'd probably like to hear from you. But they didn't give me his number. They gave my numbers to him. Home number, cell number, work number, I gave him it all. That night, I'm sitting at the dinner table with my wife. The phone rings. Thought it was a telemarketer. I'm getting ready to give this person hell. This is Admiral Lou Chatham. I heard you had my airplane at the Intrepid. And I stood up. I'm an old Air Force enlisted guy, and he was an admiral. I stood up. Oh, wait, what are you standing up for? But Lou Chatham, who is right there, he was number 5 solo pilot all 3 of those seasons. That is his airplane. He, on the phone, I could tell he was in tears. He says, I didn't think that airplane survived. He goes, I think I may be one of the only pilots of that airplane. He's pretty close, other than some ferry work that was done. That airplane never served in the fleet. It was Blue Angel number 5 its whole career. I took advantage of meeting Lou over the phone, sent him an airplane ticket that next summer. We rolled it out with a new paint job on it. We flew Lou up from Tucson, and we put look at that face. He wasn't even shaving back in 1962 here. We put a picture of Lou on a sign and had him stand next to it right in front of the airplane, and he became a rock star. We did it on a Saturday in the summer, and he must have had 150 people. He felt like a rock star, and I asked him to do it for 30 minutes. 2 hours and 30 minutes later, hey, I lost my picture. Where's my tech guy? But 2 hours and 30 minutes later, he was still into it. I had to drag him away because Lou was not a spring chicken. So, oh, we're back. We're back. But that's the kind of research we do, finding out what we have. But I love doing research for others. There's just some more stuff. I have a TBM Avenger. Up until December of this year, I had no idea where this Avenger's history was. I could find nothing on it. The history on it was very vague. In December, just a couple months ago, I get a call from Albany, New York, a maintenance guy who works for the state. He works on the helicopters and aircraft for the state police. He says, hey, I opened a drawer and I found the logbooks for an Avenger, bureau number, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's my airplane. He had the original logbooks that came with the airplane when it was built. Now, the airplane did not see combat. It was built very early 1945. It never got overseas, but it did have a very long life as a fire bomber, and I did not know that. There was some forensic things I could do. I could look inside the bomb bay and see that there was modifications in there. So I knew there was something modified in the bomb bay. Yeah, there was a fire retardant tank added. They also seeded lakes with little fish with this airplane. It was a fish bomber. So these are the kind of history things that are just, and I'm working on that right now. I was called, these 2 pictures at the bottom, another little fun story. If you can see it, there's a crummy picture. This is 1955 on Intrepid. A story I did not know because there's no real documentation to prove it other than these two photographs. I was called by a guy who's writing a book about the SNJs and BT-13s that were modified for the movie Tora, Tora, Tora. Remember that movie? When did it come out? That was like late 60s, early 70s, this movie. One of my favorite movies, but they modified SNJs and BT-13s to look like the Japanese airplanes. One of those SNJs that was modified to look like a Kate dive bomber is still flying. And he was looking at the history of this thing, and he said, hey, the logs on this airplane, the history card on this airplane says it was assigned to the Intrepid. I said, why would an aircraft carrier have an SNJ on board? And I never saw anything like it. I looked through all the deck logs. There's no mention of an SNJ on the Intrepid. In 1955, the ship went on a med cruise, 6 months in the Mediterranean. I guess the air group commander or the captain of the ship decided he needed an SNJ on board. And I found the first photograph was this one, that you could see the airplane on the deck with all these Navy fighters and dive bombers back here. And I'm like, holy mackerel, there was an SNJ on the ship. About a month later, a former crew member made a donation of his slides, and we're going through the slide. We get these probably 2 to 3 times a month. We get another 400 or 500 photographs. They have to be cataloged and put into the collection. I don't get to see them all, but our archivist is very good at describing what's on them. If she sees an airplane and she doesn't know what it is, hey, what's that? And I help her with the description so that it becomes searchable. And also in the future, our photo archives, which is just going to be hundreds of thousands of photos, will be available online. It's not yet because it's a very large project, but it'll be online for you guys to just pop on and look at our photo archives and find the photo you want of the airplane you're looking for. But in the collection was that picture on the bottom of this sailor, and there is the tail of an SNJ, and it says USS Intrepid on it, and my jaw dropped. And I was able to send this guy photographic proof that that airplane was indeed on Intrepid. Interpretation. Here's a good example of how we interpret an airplane differently than as it's served. The one interpretation story was that F-11F. I painted it the way it was, back to Blue Angel number 5. Here we have an F9F-8 Cougar. Anybody here from Wall Township, New Jersey? Kind of rare. But just down the road in Wall, down by the Jersey Shore, this airplane sat in a park called Airplane Park in Wall Township, New Jersey for probably about 25 years. And I have the photograph of when it was presented by the Navy to the mayor, and it was beautiful. I don't know why they retired the airplane in the mid-1960s, but they did. I found out later why, I'll tell you that. But so 25 years of kids playing on it. The canopy is destroyed, the windscreens are gone, the top of the nose cone is destroyed. Every removable panel was missing. Any kind of maintenance access panel was missing. And then there was another further 52 holes of unnatural origin poked into the center. The engine was out, and you can crawl inside the airplane, and Bobby Loves Betty was painted inside. I don't know what Bobby and Betty did inside that airplane, but I hope Bobby and Betty are still together and in a loving relationship. The airplane came to the Intrepid even before I got there, and I didn't even know it was there because it was all disassembled. The fuselage comes in 2 pieces, the wings were off, the tail was gone, and when I finally realized what I had, we restored it, and that's the results at the bottom there. And this is when Facebook was starting to become popular, and I started a Facebook site that doesn't exist anymore because we have a real social media office on Intrepid now. But I started getting people popping onto my Facebook page saying, hey, I played on that airplane. In fact, I had to finish my homework before my mother would let me go play on it, or I had to eat my green beans before my mother would let me go play on it. And so I asked these, and I ended up calling them my wall kids. And so I had a whole group of these people that are my age, in their 50s, sending me photographs of when they were kids, and that's what you see on the right there. So I have this whole collection of photographs. When we rolled the airplane out, when it was fully complete, we made a big ceremony out of it, and Wall Township rented a bus. One of their city commissioners filled the bus with 40 people, mostly Wall kids that were now in their 50s, and we hosted them on board for the rollout. That was great fun. But that interpretation, we painted it up as an airplane as if it served on Intrepid, because its actual history of that airplane was rather boring. And in fact, I found out why the airplane was retired from flight. Somebody twisted it. When I went to remount the horizontal stabilizer, and then the top of the vertical stabilizer sits on top of that, none of the holes lined up. There's 3 bolts holding that thing on, and I can only get 2 of the 3, any 2, but never the 3rd lined up. And if you stand behind the airplane, and then we're all modelers here, we get our airplanes nice and straight to fly, right? Except for Pete here. Pete's good for crooked airplanes, but he flies in circles anyway. But if you stand behind that airplane, you'll see that the vertical stabilizer's got a very pronounced twist in it. And so somebody bent that airplane in flight and it was retired. More interpretation, this is our F-8 Crusader. We had a Crusader on board during the Vietnam War that shot down a MiG-21. This Crusader never served in the fleet. It was used out at Willow Grove as a test airplane, kind of a boring history. So when we repainted it, we painted it up as Anthony Nargi's MiG killer. So Anthony Nargi flew from Intrepid and shot down a MiG. His airplane is lost to history. It was scrapped and it was never saved, but it is in the markings of his airplane. The only thing that I never change is the bureau number. The bureau number is original to the airplane. It's not Anthony's airplane that he flew that day, but it's got his call sign up there, Stiletto. Down here is a MiG-21, which is part of our collection. This was a gift from the Polish government. You may have saw a photograph earlier of it in Tiger Meet. The Poles, when they were the first former Eastern Bloc country to join NATO, they started participating in NATO Tiger Meets. I can answer that. That's a long story. But the Polish government actually allowed us to paint it up as a North Vietnamese MiG so that I can now display this right next to this to tell that story. That's part of the interpretation. Here's another great, we have an F-4 Phantom. This is the Phantom back in 1980 on the deck of the USS Coral Sea. You guys remember the hostage, the Iranian hostage situation? And we tried to rescue them. And the helicopter and a C-130 collided in a desert, and the rescue mission was called off. In the air, to fly air cover, were F-4 Phantoms from the USS Coral Sea. The Phantoms were from Marine Squadron 323 here, 323. The wingtips had a high visibility marking put on for one day, big broad red and black stripes, because they were afraid they were going to get over Tehran and get in a furball up close with Iranian F-4s. And so they wanted high visibility markings on it. So if you come visit our airplane, and I've repainted it to have those high visibility markings. But another one of you, if you guys have any eye for detail, if you're going to build a scale model and want to represent this airplane, the squadron markings for 323 was a maroon stripe with yellow diamonds that went across the tail and across one of the wingtips and across the stabilator tail down here. But notice that the stripe does not continue across the rudder. That airplane got a new rudder the night before the mission. So they never put the squadron markings on it. So if you want to get it right and represent that airplane on that very famous day, you got to keep the markings off the rudder. So that's the kind of details I hope scale modelers would appreciate and the things we can help you with. Boom. All right. Education is, well, our education department is vast. I don't know how many, I call them kids. I'm like the old man in the place. A lot of these young people, like this educator right here, wonderful guys and gals that work in our education department are bringing these things. Look at this little girl's face. This made my day. This was my drone exhibit that it was a temporary exhibit that we did on drones. It was in 6,000 square foot area. The AMA helped me with that because they loaned us their Reginald Denny TD design drone. The target drone. We didn't have one, but the one at the AMA museum was packed up, and Michael Smith, the curator and director out there, rented a truck and drove it himself to New York City with his collection manager to loan that to us. What that little girl's looking at right there is a QH-50 helicopter drone. So, but the drone exhibit was a great success. Watching my time here. I'm going to move along. What am I doing? What am I doing? Ah! I want to end this with a name that doohickey. You know, a lot of you aviation experts, some of these are going to be really stupid simple, but some of them I hope I can surprise you with. And I'm only doing this because I want to show you that there's some scale features on these airplanes that maybe you can appreciate if you're a scale modeler and you want to get into it. Here's our F-11F again. On the leading edge of the wing of the F-11F, on both sides are these two little pegs, two on each side. These little pegs. Anybody have a guess what that might be? I'm going to let you off the hook. Back in the day when swept wing jets were arriving on aircraft carriers, they had not modified all the carriers with the angled flight deck. The angled flight deck you see on modern carriers is there for a reason. The landing deck is on an angle so that if you have a bolter, your hook doesn't catch the resting wire and you go flying off the deck to go try again, much to the embarrassment and the teasing of your fellow squadron mates, but you're going to go try again. Back in the days of straight decks, you didn't have that luxury sometimes. If there was airplanes parked on the forward deck, you had to catch that hook. And if you didn't, you ran into the barrier. Anybody see the movie Bridges of Tokyo-ri? Yes, right. William Holden flies his Panther jet into a barrier, and they had to put the crane in front just in case he broke through the barrier. Anyway, swept wing jets had a nasty habit of sneaking through the barriers. So they put these pegs on airplanes like the F-11F so that they would actually get caught in the barrier and stop them. A lot of that stuff went away when angled flight decks were introduced. All right, this is our A4 Skyhawk, and of course you all know what a leading edge slat looks like, and vortex generators right there. There's an airplane over here, a turbine engine scale model back there. It's beautiful. That modeler went and put vortex generators on the wings. I think that's just awesome. So these little things right along the leading edge here and back here, vortex generators, cool little details that if you want to make your scale model complete, come visit me and we'll measure them up for you. Bam. My TBM Avenger, it's kind of a hard picture to see. There's a fixed slot on the leading edge. I see a lot of Avenger models that completely ignore that little doohickey. I put a little yellow arrow there so you can see how the air flows over a fixed slot. Here's our MiG-17, terrible photograph once again. Blue airplane against the blue sky. I put the yellow arrow there. An actual ground adjustable trim tab on the rudder of a MiG-17 jet. I just thought that was fascinating, this old school technology on what of the day was a modern jet. Now the pictures are pointing at the flaps. This is a photograph that I use for kids when we talk about control surfaces and the different kinds of flaps. The A4, of course, has split flaps. But what I wanted to show in this picture, this is hard to see in the photograph, but this is, right here is the speed brake on the A4 Skyhawk. There's one on each side. They're hinged on the forward edge and they open up and they're like dive brakes, speed brakes. On the speed brakes of the A4 are these three little latch mechanisms that are kind of hard to see with the lettering of VA95. But those little latch mechanisms, anybody know what those might be for? Ah, man, these are hard. You can use JATO bottles on an A4. They're designed to strap on JATO bottles on each side for short takeoff. I've only seen one film of a Marine Corps jet using these things. But in order to jettison the JATO bottles, all the pilot has to do is blip the speed brake. Just give it a blip, and those little latches undo the JATO bottle and they fall away. I thought, what an interesting concept. It saved the weight of putting the mechanism as a separate thing in the airplane, especially when you wanted the JATO bottles for balance reasons and thrust reasons in the area where the speed brake is. Aren't you glad you're hearing all this little trivia? Flaps are cool. Here's my F4. I really included this photograph to show you the red and black stripes on the wingtip. That was only on that airplane for the one day of that mission. But also the flaps on the F4, especially the inboard flap. Anybody ever hear the term blown flap? Blown flap. It uses bleed air off the engine. And if you come out and if you're interested, we'll take a look at this flap. There's actually a slot right at the top there where they tap off the jet engine and blow thrust right over the flap. The flap thinks it's flying almost 100 miles an hour faster than the jet. Wing chines on an A-12. I only did this to brag about having an A-12 on board, not an SR-71, but an A-12. Here's our FJ Fury. This is a beautiful airplane. from the mid-1950s. Once again, the little arrows are pointing at little barrier catchers. A mass balance on the MiG-20. This is when the MiG-21 had the Tiger paint scheme before we put it in Vietnamese, North Vietnamese markings. But that mass balance, it's a bit of a corrosion issue for me. Dissimilar metal, a lot of aluminum around it, and then you got this big hunk of steel. So we're always looking at that thing because it's always trying to rot away on us. Here's another great question. This is my Cougar. Right under the nose is the in-flight refueling probe right here, and right underneath the in-flight refueling probe is this little doohickey right here. And a lot of people think it's some kind of weird antenna. And every model I've ever seen of the F9F-8 omits this little detail. And it's not an antenna. It is actually for that barrier once again. It keeps the barriers from fouling the gun muzzles. There's 420 millimeters in the nose right there. And that's to keep the barrier from fouling the guns. Another little bit of trivia you never needed to know. So let's get right to any questions about what we do with Intrepid or how we can help you. Please, man, don't make me suffer up here. You got a question?
Eric, I guess the thing that I'm curious about, most curious after your presentation, which was excellent, by the way.
I paid him to say that, by the way.
No. It's the truth. But the thing is that the deterioration of the planes and the restoration of the planes, is there anything, I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking about putting tarps over them or something like that, you know? I don't know. It just...
Great question. So there's been some solutions. Now, the first two things to go on an airplane are the organics. Can you guess what the organic things are on an airplane? Rubber tires and the other petroleum product, the canopies. The canopies craze really quickly and get really bad. There are a couple. I have a T-34 Mentor that was donated to us. It really doesn't interpret into the Intrepid, but we use it for camp kids. We have a lot of kids come out for camp, and they have an aviation block, and they can get inside the T-34 because it's easy to get in, but they can work ailerons, rudders. See how ailerons, rudders, and elevators really work. I didn't want that canopy to craze, so I did put a cover on it. You'll notice in some of the pictures, a lot of the airplanes have painted canopies. That's something I've kind of resorted to in the last couple of years because I've spent money to replace canopies. I've had canopies custom. You can't get a canopy for an F9F Cougar anymore. They don't exist, but you can have one custom made. I got a company out in Ohio that you send them the old one, they'll make a mold and they'll make me one. They generally make canopies for home-built airplanes, but they'll make you anything. But it's expensive. And still, you get a nice clear canopy. Guess what? The sun beats inside. I put everything inside that Cougar. When I restored that Cougar 8 years ago, I even found the gun sight. Cockpit is 100% accurate with the ejection seat and everything, and the fabric and the rubber and the plastic parts are deteriorating because of the sun beating through. So now, paint the canopies. I paint the canopies with a, it's called Durabond, Duraback. It's made to go inside pickup truck beds. It's kind of like a rubberized paint. The good thing about it is we paint it right on the canopy, but I can catch a corner and I can peel it like a grape, and it's not damaging the airplane, and I can peel it off if I ever wanted to or had to. But for the meantime, I experimented with other kind of covers and stuff, and nothing works as well as just painting them. Thanks for the question. Did I answer it? The other thing we do to keep these things lasting long is once we paint them, we treat the inside with a corrosion inhibitor. There's one product, a lot of motorcycles use it. The motorcycles use Corrosion X because you guys are always splashing through the mud as motocross, and that's like this guy here. You know, so we treat the inside. Another one is ACF 50, which is used in the full-size aircraft industry to prevent corrosion inside airplanes. But, questions? Come on. Right, I only paid for one.
Okay. Well, so you answered, I think, very well the question about, you know, the trying to keep the things, you know, from deteriorating. And I think the other thing that I learned today was and I didn't know this until today, but that there was actually a theme, not really a theme, but you were trying to get the planes to be of the era of the
That's part of the
Intrepid.
interpretation.
Yeah. But then there's the space shuttle.
Yeah, the outlier. I
So-
also have a Concorde. You want to talk about a white elephant on the pier? I have a Concorde. The Concorde we have owns the record New York to London. So there's a New York connection. But the Concorde is extremely popular with our visitors, so that's why it's never going to leave.
So I'm going to leave this as an open-ended question for you about the space shuttle. I think that you were uniquely involved in going on the inside of that thing and doing stuff, and I'm just curious about the whole thing. Did you have any choice in getting the space shuttle? Or, I mean, I think it's probably a good thing overall.
Yeah.
But it doesn't fit into the theme.
These
You
are
know?
executive decisions above my pay grade, but I did want, I was interested in the space shuttle. You've got another question over here. Somewhere. But yeah, the space shuttle was a hard sell, but NASA wanted it in New York. So we accept it. It's a bit of a maintenance issue. We've completely pickled the inside with ACF 50. You can get into every square inch internally of that space shuttle, by the way, with taking bulkhead panels out. So it's amazing. You can go all the way out to the wingtips inside that thing. Well, yeah, my department. Yeah, I supervise that. Yes, sir.
Quick question. You gave away the French aircraft. What aircraft are you going to get in it to replace it?
Good question. I have a wish list, and there's certain things that belong on Intrepid that I need to raise money for to get. My World War II collection is horrible. I have a TBM Avenger. I need an F6F. I need an F4U Corsair. I would say I need an SB2C Helldiver, but there's only 4 Helldivers left in the world. There's the Commemorative Air Force has one, the Smithsonian has one. There's one in Greece, which I'm watching. If the Greece government ever falls down and they have to empty out their museum, I'm going to pounce. And there's one in Thailand that the French left when they were having their little wars in Indochina. So 4 SB2C Helldivers. I'm not even considering those. I would love to get an F6F Hellcat and an F4U Corsair. So they're on my wish list. Another thing is an H-3 helicopter, the type of helicopter that recovered Grissom and Young and Scott Carpenter on their space missions. I actually tracked down that actual helicopter from the Grissom and Young mission, and it ended up in the boneyard and getting scrapped. And that's where somebody's not paying attention to historic aircraft as they get retired. And I was about 2 years too late when I went looking for it. Yes, sir.
Eric, I really appreciate your presentation. It's just awesome. As we get out, I've gotten older. I've noticed a big difference in how younger people appreciate aviation versus older generation. Do you see that difference, and how is it changing?
Yeah. The question is young people, old people, how they take in aviation, especially in a World War II ship, right? Or a Cold War and Vietnam era. That's a struggle for us. And like I mentioned, we work with those New York City kids. And I just got to tell I'll just make this into a story. We hosted, we just had the 75th anniversary of the ship last year, the 70th anniversary 5.5 years ago. That was kind of our last chance, we thought, to get the World War II veterans out. We had a school group of about 50 kids, I think it was, from New York City schools, they go through the programs and they learn what these guys do. We teach them what these guys did. You're living in this country because of what these guys did. The kids actually get it. They get it. If you give it to them, they get it. And so what we did is we presented these sailors, and I think we had maybe 12 plank owners. These are the original members of a ship, Navy jargon. If the ship is commissioned and it goes into service and you're part of the first crew, you're a plank owner. And so we had these plank owners there, and the Intrepid had a wood deck its entire service career, even into the jet age. They only put steel at the landing deck and around the catapults. But the original wood deck was always there. In the museum era, we call it, and only about 20, we're in a museum 35 years, about 20 years ago, they ripped up all the wood and put steel because it was a maintenance nightmare. We saved all the wood. It's down in the bunkers. So we went and got some of that original wood deck, made them into nice little blocks with a medallion in, but this is original wood from the Intrepid. And we were going to present it to these plank owners who have a certificate that says they're a plank owner, but they don't have the real piece of wood. And so we got these kids to present it to the sailor. And there wasn't a dry eye in the place. The kids got it. The old guys got it. Everybody watching got it. So that it's a constant struggle, and it's some of it's for the average visitor, it's the parents bringing their kid in. That helps, but it is we see it, we struggle with it. That's the answer. Questions? I'm almost done, and then I'm off the hook. Yes, sir.
One more, real quick.
Thank you for your questions, by the way. I appreciate that.
Thanks. Yeah, very nice, informative presentation.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. How did you acquire the A12, and how does that fit into the scheme of things?
Yeah, it doesn't. So, like that French airplane, when I arrived at Intrepid, 14, well, it'll be 14 years in April. There's a lot of airplanes that do not belong there. But when the museum first started, they said yes to everything that was offered them. That's actually a U.S. Air Force museum, and right, Pat? That's actually one of their assets. And my predecessors had a chance to get it. I don't know the process. A lot of the records from those days 30 years ago are not preserved properly. The Intrepid Museum, I have to say, is a very professional staff in the last 14 years. But prior to that, we had a lot of well-meaning volunteers, a lot of well-meaning enthusiasts, but things weren't done like a museum quality, so some of those records are hard to find. But what a coup to get an A12 in New York City. Whether it belongs in the interpretation of the museum, at this point it doesn't matter. We make it work. We tell the Cold War story, and if you know anything about the A12, great Cold War story. It's actually a CIA piloted airplane, not an Air Force. The Air Force flew the SR-71s. I can talk for hours on the A12, but we do interpret it in the Cold War story and the Vietnam story. A12s were used over Vietnam, absolutely. And I've actually met those pilots. I actually brought one of the pilots. Same day I brought Lou Chatham, actually. I had an A-12 pilot who flew over Vietnam and Korea in an A-12. So I got a million stories. You want me to leave. They got another speaker coming up here who's going to be far more interesting. So thank you for your attention.
Give it up for Mr. Eric Boehm, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Eric.